Good afternoon, everyone, and happy Sunday. Sorry about the very casual look today, but I want to talk a little bit about the 2024 presidential election and continuing on with a little bit of an evaluation of potential Republican candidates. And today we're talking about someone whom I'm slightly biased towards, and I forgot to include something. There we go. And that is Rand Paul. Now, I think Rand Paul is a very good candidate for a general election. And there's quite a few reasons for that. Number one, he's conservative enough to hold the Republican base. He's right in line with the Republican message on issues such as guns and fiscal responsibility and taxation, as well as a few other things. But he's in the right area to be able to win moderate voters over, or independents or swing voters over, on other issues. Criminal justice reform. After all, he was one of the major sponsors of the 2018 crime reform bill, and honestly, he probably thinks it wasn't necessarily ideal and that there could have been more push for it. He's always been big into ending qualified immunity as well as ending no-knock raids. He was vocal about both of these things before they were popular. And he was a Republican. Now Democrats are taking both of those messages, right? He's going to be able to hold the Trump base. After all, he was one of the first major challengers in the Republican primaries in 2016 who decided to honor his pledge. As a matter of fact, he was the only one who did it without hesitation. So he definitely has a big base within the Trump base. And he can win over the holdouts because he has always been against involvement in foreign wars that aren't really our business, like Afghanistan and Iraq. He doesn't like sending money over to other countries when we've got problems here at home. And he is very knowledgeable about the issues and can counter a lot of the Democratic arguments against, say, a Republican plan by actually bringing in cold, hard facts and science. Because, after all, he is a medical doctor. Now, to be fair, his specialty is in ophthalmology, aka the eyes, but you can't be a medical doctor of any sort without having a basic knowledge of a lot of the other fields. He's very knowledgeable when it comes to healthcare issues, specifically insurance and funding, because he has his own practice and he has to deal with those things. And he's the right type of Republican for this era of politics, right? However, he's always going to be a bit in his father's shadow. Because even I joke on this channel that he is Ron Paul light. The same great taste of libertarianism, but with less commitment. And I kind of joke about it, but he's not on the same level of libertarianism as Ron Paul was. And, that would also appeal to a lot of moderate voters. Simply because, at the end of the day, a lot of moderate independent voters, swing voters, they don't want a candidate who's too extreme on a lot of issues. And right now, the Democrats in both chambers of Congress, as well as Joe Biden himself in the White House, are not helping their own case for being the moderate party. After all, we did just hear that the Democrats, or not the Democrats, but the Democrats, we'll call it that, now that they're in power in the White House, they are using that power to try and force social media companies to censor opinions that they deem misinformation. That's the sort of shit that goes on in tin pot dictatorships in China, in Cuba. We'll get to Cuba in a minute when we talk about Florida. In Venezuela, Nicaragua. He's starting to get the picture. The Soviet Union, you know. If the government can just censor anyone, even through utilizing private corporation to do it, that's not a commitment to free speech. That's an active ploy to prevent anyone from questioning what you say and forcing everyone to toe your line to keep them in check and force them to behave the way you want them to behave. Now, I'm not going to say that the Republicans are innocent of shenanigans of any sort, but the stuff that the media was claiming that Donald Trump and the Republican Party would do when they were in power is the same sort of stuff that the Democrats, specifically the Biden administration, are actively doing. And that brings me to a quote that Republicans always seemed to point at the Democrats during the Trump administration, which is accuse your opponent of that which you are guilty. And it seems to be that that is the case that's happening. It seems to be that that is the case that's happening. It's gone so far that the White House press secretary even said that Republicans were the ones behind pushes to defund police, which anyone with 2 brain cells or more would realize is not just a lie, but it's the definition of projection. But anyway, I'm digressing a little bit. But it's kind of the point that Rand Paul would have a very good case for being the more moderate candidate, especially as he is more liberal on on a lot of social issues, including marijuana legalization and all that stuff. Anyway, before I actually get into an initial forecast and evaluation of Rand Paul's chances, likes, comments, subscriptions are greatly appreciated, and I thank you very much for them. And, likes and comments help the algorithm not hate me. So please feed the algorithm. Like those in socialist dictatorships can't feed themselves. And a subscription and pressing that bell icon to get notifications, that's also tremendous. And that helps us reach our goal of 1,000 subscribers by the end of the year. I'm trying to get videos out as I can, but work does leave me a bit beat, and my schedule isn't nearly as consistent at my new job as it was at the old job, so bear with me as I try and figure out the best way to go about this. Anyway, let's get into it. So, Rand Paul would be very good at trying to recoup some of the losses in... Actually, I'm going to take Colorado back off. Or not Colorado, New Mexico. Rand Paul would be decent at getting back at the suburbs that Donald Trump so expertly lost, simply because a lot of suburban voters are the types of people who don't want someone who is loud and shouty and, well, a bull in a china shop, which is exactly what Trump was. They want someone with a softer image, Joe Biden, someone who portrays what the media might say is the ideal type of a president, which is somebody who can smile and wave and, say the right things and be the type of person who can communicate with anyone, be they rich or poor, white or black, anything like that. Joe Biden. Even if they're not all there upstairs, Joe Biden. And the reason why Rand Paul could bring that back and turn it around is because, well, he's really got that in spades. He's not this come at you harsh voice like, say, Rush Limbaugh was. Rest in peace. Who, if you disagree with him on a private program or something like that, he's just going to shout at you. Yes, he has gotten pretty feisty with regards to Dr. Fauci. I'm using doctor in air quotes here because truth is, nothing that Fauci has said has worked. Let's be frank. If everything Fauci said was true and worked, we wouldn't have had this whole shit show of a last year and a half. And wouldn't it be now all of a sudden recontemplating mandates and lockdowns? So, and Rand Paul seems to be the only person who is actually investigating or really big onto the idea that not only was Fauci's department complicit in funding the lab in Wuhan, which most medical professionals are going to say was a, I forget what the exact term is, but it's a something for benefit, or funding for benefit. Effectively, it's you pay them for some sort of information that you think would be beneficial for whatever purpose or reason. And of course, Fauci obfuscates all of that. By the way, this video is very likely to get taken down. So, for voters and independents and moderates who would be skeptical of, the need for another mandate, the need for another lockdown, those who are like, come on, let's just end this and deal with it. Most people are going to get vaccinated. Most people are going to do the right thing. They're going to take care of themselves. They're very responsible, and most people have been. Let's just let this run its course. We're done with this bull crap. And yet you've got people who are trying to re-implement all of it. So he can provide a very good contrast. And like I said, he's very intelligent. He's very quick-witted. And he can communicate very effectively. But like I said, he is a little bit in his father's shadow. So I'm going to get rid of the states that are likely for either party off of this list of swing states. I'm putting Iowa and Ohio there, but actually I'm putting Ohio in safe Republican category for now. I'm struggling to find Ohio being able to swing back. Iowa, we don't know. It went for Obama by similar margins to Trump both times. And, well, Iowa can make a massive swing the other direction. So let's pump the brakes on calling it a red state right now, though there is very strong evidence to that point. I'm also putting Alaska in that category simply due to ranked choice voting and the fact that the Libertarian Party and Libertarian movement tends to be very strong in Alaska, and that's something Rand Paul is probably going to lean into in quite a few states. That should very much help him out in winning over critical battlegrounds. Speaking of places the libertarian movement might be something Rand Paul will lean into, let's talk about New England and talk about Maine and New Hampshire. I think Rand Paul would stand, assuming polling is roughly even, he would stand a decent chance at winning Maine outright. I don't think he'd be able to win the Portland area. Chances are that the Portland area would, if it's its own district and the rest of the state isn't, it would be a 3-1 split. But because of we don't know exactly where the district boundaries are, I'm just going to be forecasting for Maine as a whole. But just know it would likely be a 3-1 split for whoever wins it. Because Rand Paul would be able to do better in the Portland metro area than, say, Donald Trump would, as well as maintaining enough strength in the rural parts of the state. Like I said, I think he would stand a pretty good chance at winning Maine outright. Same with New Hampshire. But New Hampshire, well, is well known. I'm not going to put them in likely or anything like that. And it's a confidence margin that I'm using right now. Texas, I'm pretty confident that they vote for Rand Paul, even with lots of influx of people moving to Austin, Houston, Dallas, and the suburban shift towards the Democrats. Like I said, I think there would be some rebound with a more friendly, polished image of, say, a Rand Paul versus a Donald Trump. Florida, I'm also reasonably confident, especially with Republicans going to be having a field day in the run-up to the midterms with just linking the Democratic Party to a lot of these very public figures in the Democratic Party, such as Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Rashida Tlaib, Ilhan Omar, and a few others, as well as a lot of other progressives who, for lack of a better word, are basically sucking off the Cuban regime rather than supporting the people of Cuba. And by that I mean, no matter how much they say, well, we support the people of Cuba and all that stuff, they're in the same breath saying, but we also have to remember the U.S.'s responsibility in causing the strife down there. It's a bad look to be saying that, because number one, as we all learned, anything before the word but doesn't count. So they're basically trying to blame Cuba's communist government from brutalizing its own people. They're trying to blame that on the U.S. and the Cold War hardline stance against communism. And I think this is a very bad look, because it's excusing all of the real problems that have come from Cuba's government and their dictatorship, and it's brushing them off and saying, yeah, but it's not as bad as what the U.S. is doing to help cause this. And I'm not arguing that the U.S. sanctions have hurt Cuba. They probably have, and they probably have done a little bit of damage to the ability of the Cuban people to prosper, but nowhere near the level that Cuba's own government has caused. And Cubans and Cuban Americans have every right to be pissed at the people who are trying to blame the United States for Cuba's government. And until progressives and American socialists get that through their head, Cubans are going to continue to vote for Republicans, and they may become even more Republican than before. And that is not a good thing. You know, we could be talking about Republicans winning Miami-Dade at the presidential level if the Republicans are successful in their messaging. North Carolina, I think until otherwise proven, it's a perpetually leans Republican state, or more accurately, you can have the confidence to say it's probably going to go Republican unless the Democrats have something really awesome happen. I think Rand Paul would be very good in the Mountain West. Again, that's another area of the country where the libertarian move is pretty strong. And I'm going to make this reasonably quick. He would definitely be able to win back Maricopa County and therefore Arizona as a whole. Georgia, like I said, he'd be better in the suburbs than Donald Trump would, and even though the state is having tremendous population growth in the Atlanta metro, I think he could also definitely help to mitigate some of that with turnout in the rural areas, and the fact that Rand Paul is not entirely the worst possible candidate when it comes to minority outreach. particularly black outreach, because he has his name attached to the criminal justice reform bill. He has his name attached to the efforts to end no-knock raids, to end qualified immunity. He was one of the first to do it, and he can put that message out there and cite it. And that is a very powerful message. You can say, progressives were 6 years behind me. And I'm a Republican. And I think that's very powerful. And let's not forget, Donald Trump had the best performance among black voters of any Republican since, 2004, but really in a long time. And I want to see what happens in the midterms, but that might be a trend. Again, I'm not going to base that thought off of one data set. I think that's ridiculous. But before we get into where Georgia would be, I'm just going to put it in the tilt category, and I'm going to put New Hampshire and Maine in the tilt category. Means very competitive states. By the way, that puts Paul at 270 already. Yes, I do actually think Rand Paul would beat Joe Biden. Virginia, Richmond, Northern Virginia, Hampton Roads, they're just too heavily Democratic. I don't see it being more competitive than 5%. I really don't. Unless we have a few data points that really change things and change my understanding of politics here in the Commonwealth. Virginia is pretty much a blue state at this point. But we'll see. New Mexico, I'm putting in the likely Democratic category simply because it's Albuquerque and Santa Fe. Those two cities determine the state. Wisconsin, 2020 might be the last election Wisconsin goes Democratic at the presidential level for a very long time, unless the Republican Party really changes its tune and just screws up in the driftless area. But the driftless area is drifting towards the GOP simply because of, it's a very similar state to an Iowa or an Ohio, really any of these upper Midwest Rust Belt states. It has a lot of people who grew up voting for a certain type of Democrat, and they still want to believe that the Democratic Party represents what they grew up with, and that it is not the party of New York and California progressives. They think it's the party of auto unions, farmers, people like them who want to go shoot on the weekends, but also support labor unions. Sad truth is, the Democratic Party really isn't that anymore. Michigan, I'm not sure Rand Paul would go over as well in, say, Michigan. I think it would still be a very competitive state, and I think there's evidence to suggest that the non-Detroit, non-Ann Arbor areas are definitely shifting towards the GOP. Problem is, Detroit is still a very, very heavily Democratic city, and it is a very, very large portion of the state's population. And Democratic margins there are just well beyond. Moving to Minnesota, Minneapolis, St. Paul, while certainly Rand Paul would improve there, specifically the suburbs there, I'm not sure he'd be able to get enough votes there to truly win the state. I'd actually put it in likely. I'm pretty confident about that right now. Things could definitely change. Pennsylvania, I could see Rand Paul winning it because I think he'd do better in the collar counties and in the Allegheny County area. I'm not so sure he'd be able to replicate Donald Trump's performances in the rural T. But there's a lot more votes to be had in the collar counties. So I could really see this going both ways. I'm going to err on the side of caution and say Pennsylvania would still vote for Biden, because I think Biden has a little bit of a lingering home state advantage there, even though he's mostly from Delaware. Nevada, controversial take, but I think Rand Paul could win Nevada. And again, that has to do with the fact that the Republicans are going to be going very hard to try and win Latino voters of all their different nationalities: Cubano, Venezuelan, Venezuelan, I can't say that. Venezuelan, Nicaraguan, Mexicano. You get the picture, right? And Rand Paul, again, has that libertarian vibe that plays very well in the Mountain West, in Utah and Idaho, Montana, Wyoming, hell, even Colorado to an extent, New Mexico, Arizona, Nevada. And that could help him win the state. Now, obviously, this is a very rough guess as to how things would happen. And there are certainly states that if you said they would go differently, I wouldn't argue too much with you. Simply because, well, I think 2024 is going to be a relatively competitive election. That said, the Democrats have really been, since 2000, the kings of snatching defeat from the jaws of victory. Basically, they have a good situation, and then they screw it up because the Democrats can't seem to figure out how to incorporate and mellow the message of its movements, like, say, the Tea Party movement was to the Republicans. The Democratic Party seems to not know what to do with movements like the progressive movement and all of that stuff. And so they do a horrifying blend of ignoring them and then co-opting their ideas, or telling them, no, we can't win with you, and then all of a sudden adopting their platform. Stuff like that. And all it does is piss those voters off. Whereas the GOP with the Tea Party movement was like, okay, tone down your messaging and rhetoric a little bit. We'll adopt some of your ideas. Not all of them, but some of them. We'll work on this, that, and the other thing, and we'll discuss ways to do it, but just mellow your rhetoric, do this, and we'll work together. And the Democrats can't seem to figure that out. And unfortunately, it leads to their more crazy members saying ridiculous things that are going to inevitably get the Democratic Party in a bind. Now, that said, we can point to examples where Republicans said really dumb things and got their party into a bind. You could argue the entire Trump administration. During the Tea Party movement, you had one or two, maybe three Senate candidates who lost themselves the election through insanely stupid comments. But anyway, I'm going to end it here. I want to thank everybody for watching. I hope you all enjoyed, and sorry this one stretched out a little bit. Take it easy. Have a very lovely day, and I'll see you all next time. Bye-bye.